purpose they're supposed to be. First of all, let me thank the Preservation Society for having me, for putting on this event. As you all know, you're in a situation here with everybody else in the room. You are trying to find funds, trying to take care of properties that you are stewards of. And in many situations, it might involve just the existence of your organization continuing. So thank you all for being here and taking that step and first being interested. That's the most important thing, certainly. Very wise person told me one time that if you don't think you're the smartest person in the room, make sure everybody knows it. So I want to make sure that we run this, and kind of every talk that I do is as much of a discussion as anything else. You all have been here all morning. You've learned about aspects of your buildings, your properties that you need to consider when you're planning the future for your historic building. Funding these things, I get the difficult task of telling you where you should go to look to find the money to make those changes and those capital improvements you might have. As you might imagine, funds are tight everywhere these days. So I'm here really to introduce you to a couple of things that I've heard about in the past, that have worked before, and to give you some ideas for the types of grant initiatives and the types of financial processes that might help you in securing funds for your capital campaign and securing the future of your property. And I apologize again, my computer ran out of battery, so I only have a few photographs in here. I hate being in an audience where it's all text on the screen, so hopefully there are at least a couple of photographs for you to look at here. So, as I kind of alluded to, the world of historic preservation in the last 5 years or so, unfortunately has seen a lot of what we see financially around the country, around the world. Some of the go-to pots of money that people have relied on for historic preservation work, we call bricks and mortar work, has disappeared. The Save America's Treasures program, which was kind of the premier grant, big pot of money, I guess, nationally for historic preservation projects, was defunded in 2010, I believe. With that was another grant fund for Preserve America communities. Unfortunately, Charleston and Mount Pleasant were both Preserve America communities, so prior to 2012, there was an additional pot of money for doing planning work on projects. Unfortunately, we've seen that go away as well. And another initiative in around 2006 to 10 seemed to be a kind of go-to opportunity for preservation works. The History Channel had put together a group of grants and a fund for saving our history. And unfortunately, they decided to no longer continue that as well. So, unfortunately, I'm starting with the grim news. And a lot of times, that's where you have to start to build something, right? On the face of it, many of us in the preservation community will tell you that times were much better a few years ago. It was a little easier to give people advice on how they might come up with capital money for their churches, for their religious organizations. There is still some opportunity. And the thing that I want to leave you with today, when we're talking about grants, when we're talking about any sort of funding for your property, our next speaker, Stephanie, I'm sure will touch on this a little bit. But in order to have a successful organization, and in order to have a successful bricks and mortar existence in the community, you need to have the structure of your organization sound before anyone's going to invest in what you hold dear. So when you're thinking about searching grants, everyone thinks of grants as sort of free money. we're all adults, we should know that there's no such thing as free money out there, right? There's always some sort of strings that are attached with whatever somebody's giving you, granting you. They're investing in the project. So when you're looking at grant programs and thinking about where you might find a grant that fits with your organization, think about what a grant really is for. It's not somebody handing you a check and saying, use this as you see fit. It really is somebody investing in you and in your organization. So you want to make sure that the mission of the granting organization is similar to yours, something that you can at least latch on to. When you're putting together your application, don't assume that because you've put a grant together before, it was awarded. Since you have some information on file, you can just sort of copy that, reuse it. There's no such thing as a typical grant application, right? You need to be revising things. You need to be making sure that when you're responding to a grant statement or an interest, filing a letter of interest with these granting organizations, you want to make sure that you are specifically addressing what they want to fund. It's their money. You want it in your bank account, but you need to prove to them that you are aligned with what they're interested in funding in their projects. And you also want to make sure that you're selling yourself to these organizations as a strong institution. Unfortunately, we're at a point where religious centers' attendance at regular services around the country is at a pretty low point. Unfortunately, we see a lot of historic churches in particular. A few examples here in Charleston that have seen a very low attendance in the last 10, 15 years. There are all sorts of reasons for that. We won't go into that. But the interest in carrying out a successful financial campaign or capital campaign really is about building momentum and showing that your organization, even though it's down, even though it's not what it may have been 10, 50, 100 years ago, the point is to show that you are strong, to show that you're building momentum for the future. So you want to get that across in any sort of application that you're putting together. You also want to build on every little success that you have. So I'm going to show you a few different grant organizations, a few different grant applications you might put together that are for amounts of $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. You may have $100,000 worth of work or more to do on your institution, but you've got to start somewhere. Even little tiny grants build momentum. So you want to make sure that you're hitting, no matter what you can, and building on that success. So that $1,000 grant for this year for doing some sort of plan work, which means you're going to hire an architect to help you put together plans for what you need to do on your church. That's a starting point. Getting that money, getting that funding from a different organization is something you can leverage for bigger grant awards and for asking organizations, asking your congregations to continue to donate to this effort. If you're showing some sort of positive momentum and always putting that out there, no matter how small it is, people want to be part of a successful organization, a successful operation. So build on those little tiny successes and make sure you celebrate them every step along the way. So I'm going to run through a few grant pots of money, granting organizations. The first few are things that the historic preservation community knows like the back of our hand most of the time. If you come to me and you tell me you've got a historic building, I'm going to send you to these 3 or 4 different places. For a religious organization, you might not think of these types of opportunities. In fact, as I said at the beginning of things, just the fact that you're sitting in this room shows that you recognize that what you have in your hands, whether you're a leader of your congregation, as a minister, whether you're a person on the vestry in charge of the capital improvements for your church, you hopefully recognize through the Preservation Society's initiative that what you have is not only a house of worship for you, it's a piece of history for Charleston. And to say Charleston, I mean the entire surrounding community. I don't mean downtown, I'm thinking broader terms of things. But you're here because you have a piece of history, something that's important to your own organization, and something that's important to the larger community. Charleston is known as the Holy City, right? That's where the name for this event comes from. That's what hopefully has been drilled into your head all day. So don't think that you're out on an island by yourself. You're part of a larger community. You should key into that as you're putting together these funding opportunities. So here are the typical historic preservation grant funds. The one that I think of first, because I used to work there, as Robert said, is a fund that's administered by the State Historic Preservation Office, which is up in Columbia. So this is open to historic properties around the entire state of South Carolina. Admittedly, this pot of money has been diminished in the last few years. It is a percentage of the federal money that the State Historic Preservation Office gets to administer federal programs. So when those appropriations go down from the federal government, this pot of money goes down. But the SHPO, as we like to call it, State Historic Preservation Office, has to spend a certain percentage of their budget on projects out in the field. So that's where this comes from. These are used for planning purposes anywhere around the state, and they're used for stabilization, bricks and mortar repair work in certain communities around the state. Charleston is one of those communities. So you can technically use this money if you're awarded a grant for bricks and mortar work, stabilization work to your property. The grants range from $2,500 up to $25,000 usually. $30,000 is the maximum that they will grant this program. Last year, the entire fund was $110,000. So you're not going to see very many $30,000 grants out of this. They prefer to spend money in this grant organization or grant pot on planning money. And as I was saying before, you want to show that you're a strong organization. So if you know that you have termite damage in your building, you know that has to be repaired. Don't go out there at first and look for that $500,000. You need to make sure that you're planning correctly. So you need to make sure that you have a plan prepared by an architect. You've got a way of, you've got a list of things that need to be done, steps along the way. This money first will pay for that type of thing. You can apply for these numerous times, so you can kind of build on top of them year by year. It requires a dollar for dollar match, so you need to come up with $5,000 if you're asking for $5,000. Again, Stephanie's talk after me about capital campaigns is going to come in handy there. And these are technically not awarded to an organization. They technically have to go through the local government. So in putting together your application, you want to contact, make sure the city of Charleston, town of Mount Pleasant, wherever your municipality is, knows about this, so that they can pass that money through to you. And that's not usually a difficult issue. Generally, the State Historic Preservation Office helps with that, but you want to know that that's what you're going to need to do eventually. Another great source of money for planning purposes, most of these are for planning documents, for exploring what you need to do rather than actually giving you money for the construction, are the National Trust Preservation Funds grant. And this similarly comes out of a pot of federal money that's allocated through the National Trust. They're $2,500 to $5,000. Unlike most organizations and grant funds that have an annual cycle, the National Trust has 3 deadlines every year. These are highly competitive grants. Everybody that's out there in some sort of historic field, whether they're looking to put signage on their historic site, whether they're looking to put together a new plan for the guidance of their historic house. Those are the types of groups that you're up against lot of folks throughout the Southeast that you'd be competing with. But again, it's a good place to start. It's a good place to start building momentum. It's also a great place to show that you are, if you wind up with a preservation fund grant, whether it's through the SHPA or through the National Trust, simply indicating that you understand you have a historic property, a historic resource on your hands, is an important way to kind of continue. Technically, you need to be a member of Forum with the National Trust. That's an organization or a group that the National Trust has together. So that's a kind of a technicality as part of the grant organization. And these are used technically for either planning or for education and outreach. So I think most of what you'd be interested in is the planning side of things. The National Trust also has a grant fund called the Joanna Favreau Fund for Historic Preservation. Again, these generally range from $2,500 to $10,000. There's a dollar-for-dollar match. They can't be used for construction work again. These are for planning purposes, but that'll pay for the $15,000 in architects' drawings that you might need to do as part of your capital campaign. And again, you must be a National Trust Forum member as well. This is noticed about the National Trust Interiors. The Cynthia Woods Mitchell Fund for Historic Interiors. Generally, again, same sort of range as the previous fund that we looked at, dollar-for-dollar match and not for construction work. I shouldn't need to tell you that churches, religious institutions, religious buildings tend to have pretty elaborate interior spaces for one reason or another. Many of our religious traditions relied upon capturing people's thoughts as they're sitting there in the church space. So these, I think, would be good applicants for an interiors grant. These, again, though, are for planning purposes. So don't think that you're going to wind up buying new pews with this money. You're going to wind up with a report on what you need to do. But again, that's the basis for creating a successful capital campaign and showing people that you have a plan for going forward with soliciting funds. The Cynthia Woods Mitchell Fund is for, as I said, obtaining professional expertise, hiring a preservation architect, hiring a consultant, this type of thing, so planning sorts of things. The National Trust does also have, if you wind up in this situation, an emergency fund as well. Again, these are not large amounts of money, but this is the sort of thing that can come in handy if your building develops a leak as part of a, say, you get a hurricane through next week and you get a large tree falling on the roof of your building. This might help in defraying some of the costs associated with repairing roof leaks or stabilization of some sort or another. So just remember that this is out there. If you really do wind up in trouble for some sort of emergency reason, the National Trust does have some resources for that as well. Those are the typical preservation-related grants and resources that I think of. Since I said at the beginning I was going to run this as a discussion, I just seem to have lectured so far. Does anyone have any questions, or does anyone have any other sort of preservation-specific grants that they know about that they want? Yes.
So the slide you mentioned you have to be a forum member. Question one is, what does it take to be a forum member? And I love it there is forum members in there. Number two, we talked about matching funds. What qualifies as matching funds?
So, is anyone in here a forum member? You didn't get to be a forum member. Are you a forum? I'm sorry. So, Forum is a group that the National Trust has put together. It's sort of out of their larger membership, it's sort of an inner circle type of It does cost money. I can't remember what it is. It's, I think, probably $100 a couple, $200 from organizations. I think I would have to look into that and exactly how that works. The folks at the National Trust office can certainly explain that a little bit better. I don't know if you know the particulars of that, how that works. Yeah. I'm sure that they can let you know how that works. I don't know whether you apply and if you're granted something, then you have to be a form member. I'm assuming that with nonprofit groups and that sort of thing, that they would work with you to figure that out. But as I said, that's, as I understand, kind of a technicality of the program. Matching funds. All of these grant funds are a little bit different into what they'll allow you to count as matching funds. Some of them want to see that as cash in your accounts. Some of them want to see it specifically in a capital campaign account, not necessarily in the regular operating costs for your organization. So again, having a good accounting record for your group is important. Some of them, though, are a little bit more open-minded, I guess, in matching funds and will let you count volunteer service, that type of thing, as long as it's accounted for.
What if we get a grant back by the corporation, is that back and use that matching fund?
Some of them will let you do that and leverage other grant funds. It really does depend, though, on the group and what they're wanting to see. Just my take on it would be the granting groups that are more fiscally acute probably want to see that you're using your own funds. Ones that are a little bit more focused on nonprofits in particular and getting their money out in the community are probably a little bit more lenient in matching dollars. So sorry there's no exact answer to it, but they do depend quite a bit on the group. Anyone else think of historic preservation funds that I've missed? No? So here are a few that are a little bit different from the typical preservation funding that we think of. This first one is money from the National Endowment for the Humanities. These are preservation assistance grants for collections. So you need to think of your organization in a couple of different ways. And a lot of this depends on how you want to present your image to that granting organization. You all have religious organizations. You have a ministry, obviously, and that's front and center in your organizational mission. And that's probably what you think of on a daily basis, ministering to your congregation and to the larger community. But, as we've talked about already, you also have a historic building to take care of. You also, whether you think of it this way or not, have a historic collection. Some of you might have historic archival records as well. There are pots of money out here for parts of your organization that you might think of just as part of the larger ministry. So I want to challenge you to think of what you have as far as resources and what you might need for help. Is anyone here with Citadel Square Baptist Church? No. I talked with them a few years ago now, and they were interested. They're doing some work, as you've no doubt seen. They had quite a bit of termite damage in the roofing beams. While I was there talking to them and kind of brainstorming on different financial opportunities, I wanted to make sure that there was some information to put together some sort of grant for the work that they wanted to do. And I asked them, what kind of records do you have? And they said, well, we can go upstairs and take a look at them. They had all of their vestry and account books from the mid-19th century. And they were sitting there in a room. They were well cataloged. But the number of times that I've gone to a religious institution around the state and asked them that question, and they said, well, yeah, we've got some things, the old books, they're up in the office somewhere in a box. Those are important documents for many of us in the historic preservation work. So They might not tell you everything about what you do on a daily basis in ministering to your congregations, but they are important resources, and there are funds out there for taking care of them. So this is a grant fund that is focused on that. Again, this mostly has to do with planning what needs to be done and getting ready for spending money. Sorry, this slide isn't out of place. This is supposed to be for the emergency funds. The National Endowment for the Humanities also has America's Historical and Cultural Organizations grant. These are for all sorts of organizations, nonprofit organizations around the country. These generally are for interpreting a historic place. So think about that for a minute. Think about what you have as far as a historic group in your congregation, what you have as far as a historic building. How much of the community outside of your congregation knows about your group and your building? This is a kind of a fundamental thing as well. If you're going out there looking for money and asking for people for money, you want them to know who you are, why you're important to them, and why they should be giving money to you. So this type of grant fund, again, is something that would be helpful for building some momentum going forward. Think about whether there's a way that you can interpret your church, your synagogue, your place of worship, and putting out there that message that you are an important piece of what makes Charleston the greater community, the holy city. So keep this in mind. Might not be the typical thing that you think of when you're looking for a grant. And then there are also a million different public or private grant funds that are out there. I mean, these can be anything, right? The key, again, is matching your organization's mission to these granting organizations. I've put up here a couple of larger grant funds that have been used for preservation reasons, or preservation ways in the past. These are big corporate names. These are bigger organization names. So the chance of you, if you've got a congregation of 200 people in a small building in Charleston, chances of you being on the radar screen now are probably minimal. But if you start building that kind of campaign and that image, that idea of why you're important and what you've given to the community, you may be able to make a case a few years down the line to one of these groups that you know how to manage your money, you've seen other grants come in, you've used them wisely, and that you've got a good sense of what they're going to get out of it in granting you money. So this is where I'm going to tell you that you need to do your research. This hopefully is just a spark to get you out there looking for different funds, looking for different money that might be out there, and trying to figure out how to match some of these missions of granting organizations. A couple that I found, I'll admit I don't know a whole lot about these organizations, but a few private funds that I found that I think are related to the audience here. There's a foundation out of Atlanta called the Deowall Foundation. I had never heard of this before, putting together this presentation. They admittedly spend most of their money in Atlanta and in Georgia, but they do say that they are open to funding groups throughout Georgia, Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, and South Carolina. So this is the type of thing where it may be a long shot, but it's worth a try. They are out there to provide capital expenses. This grant fund is specifically for capital expenses on religious institutions and ministries. So they have a preference sometimes for, most of the time, for new churches, and that seems to be what they've done in the past. But they have provided funds for some Atlanta area churches that were doing a restoration program. There's a foundation called the Cora Foundation. Has anyone heard of this before? No? So I was thinking through this, I was like, I don't know what these are, but I'm sure that I'm going to stand in front of 50, 60 people and they're going to say, yeah, we've heard about that. This is a grant fund that provides assistance to Christian-based ministries. They're focused on programs for ministry, but you can use these for capital campaigns or capital funds as well. So again, learn about this group, learn about this foundation, contact them, tell them you're interested, and start to kind of craft that application in your mind. What would you tell them about yourself and about what makes your mission match theirs? There's a group called the Deowall Foundation that, again, is to support ministries of all sorts. These can be used for capital programs as well. It seems like most of these are for educational types of ministry and outreach, but again, they do mention that it can be used for capital improvements. As we saw with the historic preservation funds, most of those say, not at all. Don't put any of this money into actual nails driving into to clapboard or bricks and mortar. So this is a nice change to actually see that they fund the actual work. So again, think about what makes your property unique. We have a lot of churches in Charleston, represented by all of you sitting here. What makes you different from the person sitting next to you, and your organization is slightly different? Is there a story, is there a history in your church that makes you slightly different from somebody else? How do you stand out? Is there an important event? Who are the important people that are associated with the founding of your church and the history of it? You never know. There may be a grant fund from a family that had something to do with your organization 100 years ago. So do that research, figure out what your story is, and see if there's a way to connect to a group like that. Just as an example, I threw out there a grant fund that you would never think of putting together with a religious institution, the American Battlefield Protection Program grant. But as I was looking at it, I thought, there's, not in Charleston, but there's certainly churches that were part of battlefields and part of armed conflicts, and even though that's not what the church probably wants to be known for, the churches around Gettysburg, I'm sure that they played a role in the events that happened there. Can you construct some sort of a history, or maybe not construct, that's not the right word, but find and use that history of your organization in looking for these types of these funds that you might not think of. But again, that's just an example. And remember that you're trying to connect with a larger audience. It's not just about your congregation, the members of your organization. It's about projecting outward, reaching the community, showing your place in the community, why you're important, how you've helped that place become what it is. So I'm going to talk for just a second about what has been the most successful historic preservation tool in the country for the last 30 years, 40 years now. And you're going to look at me like I'm insane. Tax credits. Why is a guy talking to me about tax credits? I'm a nonprofit group. I don't generate any sort of tax revenue. But hear me out. Just know that this is out there for you. Because there are a few religious institutions that have used tax credits in some way or another with the properties that they own. Generally, this is not the place of worship that they own, but tax credits have been used on what we think of as religious properties. So a tax credit in general is a dollar-for-dollar reduction in your federal or state income taxes. And the taxpayer, whether it's an individual, as we pay our 1040s every year, file our 1040s every year, or an organization, an income-producing organization, they take a tax credit when they file their taxes. Tax credits are tools for local governments, federal government, to spawn There are all sorts of tax credits out there. You may have heard of energy investment tax credits in the previous presentation, although they probably weren't off the wall enough to tell you that you should be using tax credits on your religious properties. Affordable housing tax credits, all sorts of things. The one that I work with on a daily basis is the historic tax credit. Basically, for whatever you put into your building, as long as a substantial amount of money, you're going to get 20% worth of tax credits from doing that. So if you put $1 million into your property, you're going to generate $200,000 in tax credit. Now, you, as a nonprofit group, can't use that tax credit. But there is a whole world of investors out there that want your tax credits and will compensate you by investing in your project. There are a lot of tight ropes to walk as a nonprofit group in the tax credit world. So generally, this is not going to be beneficial unless you have a huge project and unless you're going to involve an organization or some sort of tenant that is income producing as part of the project. Again, this is admittedly a very small opportunity. It has to be used for the right sort of situation. But you can generate quite a bit of tax credits for large campaigns that you're doing. It has to be a substantial rehab, has to be reviewed by the Park Service, and has to be a National Register property. But imagine for many of you, that's not an issue. You can often make a case for something being significant, make a case for a religious property being significant to the birth and growth of the community. So the National Register status is usually something that we can work within. So again, think of the tax credit process. I guarantee you, if you're tell somebody that you have a historic preservation rehab project, the first thing they're going to mention to you is, did you know there are tax credits out there? Be advised that you're a nonprofit, so generally you're not going to be able to use them. But let's say you have a house of worship and you have a large office space, you have a large Sunday school area or ministry area that's no longer being used. Perhaps you take on a tenant in that space. The money that you spend in that might generate tax credits with that group that's going in there as the group that's going to partner with you. So there are possibilities for that. Generally, if you're in a building and you're going to use it for religious services, for worship, nonprofit use after that, you can't take the tax credit. But these do come in handy sometimes. And I will also mention that none of us in this room as preservationists like to think of this, but there are a large number of historic churches that are no longer able to be maintained as churches. There are a couple of high-profile incidents of this in Charleston, where a congregation, a group, is no longer able to keep up the church and is moving. Needs to go to a property that conforms more to the size of their organization now. Tax credits in many situations can be used to bring life back into those spaces and to make sure that they are preserved as you see them in the community. So tax credits can be used in the unfortunate situation that you're moving on to a different property as well. This can be used by a later tenant. Do you all have any questions? Yes.
Are there any other types of partnerships that you've seen or you might think of that you use? What I'm hearing you talk about there, it sort of sounds like a partnership with wants to take advantage of the tax code.
Right.
So perhaps there's some churches or some organizations that can partner.
So the most appropriate example of a tax credit being used on a religious property, a church up, and I'm afraid I don't remember the name of the church in Columbia, Bethel A&E Church in Columbia, used tax credits a few years ago to replace the stained glass windows, and to basically do the stabilization work that was needed to create what's going to be kind of a museum. You may have heard of this recently because they're getting ready to start the Civil Rights Museum up in Columbia. They wanted to go into the Bethlehem Church. So what the church did, I think they recognized that that size of the building was not appropriate for them anymore. I think they were moving to another site. They helped create a partnership called the Renaissance Foundation, which was technically a for-profit entity. The church was, I think the church or the nonprofit group has to be less than a third of the ownership. But that's all in how you structure it. And then there was, again, a board that was in charge of the other 2/3 of the property in the partnership. They put this together, took the tax credits. It was a large amount of money, so they wound up getting a tax credit investor. The way a tax credit investor works, say you generate $1 million in tax credits, they're going to pay you something like $750,000 for your $1 million in tax credits. But since you can't use the $1 million in tax credits, that's $750,000. That's the one example in the state of South Carolina that I know of. But again, they're not using that building for religious services anymore. They have used it to bring a tenant in, this museum, which is all something that I think that the church has generated, but it's something that they had to organize outside of their ministry. Any other questions? No? All right. Yeah, thank you.